The mansion stood tall against the midnight sky, its windows glowing like scattered diamonds across velvet. Inside, champagne glasses clinked, and laughter echoed through marble halls. Richard Pemberton moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and offering polite smiles that never quite reached his eyes. At 63, he had built an empire from nothing, and the weight of that achievement had carved deep lines into his face. He trusted no one. That was his first rule. His second was to never show weakness. Tonight, surrounded by politicians, investors, and socialites who pretended to be his friends, Richard felt the familiar emptiness that came with wealth. They all wanted something from him. Every conversation was a negotiation. Every smile hid an agenda. The party had been planned for months. It was supposed to celebrate the acquisition of his latest company, a tech firm worth billions. But as Richard looked around at the faces pretending to be impressed, pretending to care, he felt nothing but contempt. These people would abandon him the moment his fortune disappeared. He knew it with absolute certainty because he had seen it happen before. His father had been wealthy once, a real estate developer who lost everything in a single bad deal. Richard was 15 when the creditors came. He watched his father's friends vanish overnight. The phones stopped ringing. The invitations dried up. His father died 2 years later, broken and alone, and Richard swore he would never be that vulnerable. He would build his fortune on stone, not sand, and he would trust no one enough to be hurt by their betrayal. From across the room, he noticed her. Maria Santos moved quietly between the guests, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. She had worked for him for 7 years, yet Richard realized with a start that he barely knew anything about her. She was simply there, always in the background, efficient and invisible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform was pressed and spotless. She never looked anyone directly in the eye. Richard had 3 other housekeepers, 2 chefs, a personal assistant, a driver, and a groundskeeper. He employed 15 people in total, and he could not remember the last time he had spoken to any of them beyond giving instructions. They were part of the machinery of his life, necessary but unremarkable. But tonight, watching Maria navigate the crowd with quiet dignity, something shifted in his perspective. An idea began forming in Richard's mind. It was reckless, perhaps even cruel, but he had spent his entire life testing people. Why should she be any different? Everyone had a price. Everyone broke eventually. He wanted to know what hers was. More than that, he wanted to prove to himself, once again, that his cynicism was justified, that even the most seemingly virtuous person would reveal their greed when given the opportunity. Richard cleared his throat and tapped his champagne glass with a silver spoon. The crystal ring silenced the room. All eyes turned toward him. He smiled, but it was the smile of a man about to conduct an experiment. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," he announced. His voice carried authority that made people instinctively straighten their postures. "Tonight, I want to do something unusual, something that will test a theory I have long held about human nature." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Maria had frozen near the kitchen door, her tray balanced in both hands. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the walls. "Maria, would you come here, please?" Richard called out. The room went silent. Maria's eyes widened with fear. Slowly, carefully, she set down her tray and walked toward him. Each step seemed to take enormous effort. When she reached the center of the room, she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. She could feel everyone staring at her, judging her, wondering why the millionaire had singled her out. "How long have you worked for me, Maria?" Richard asked. 7 years, sir," she replied softly. Her accent carried the warmth of her native Brazil, though her voice trembled. 7, Richard repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "And in all that time, have I ever asked you what you wanted, what you dreamed about?" Maria shook her head slightly. She looked confused and terrified. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew instinctively that it was not good. Rich people did not single out their maids at parties for pleasant reasons. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a black card. It caught the light, its surface embedded with actual diamond dust. The guests gasped. Everyone in that room knew what it was. A Centurion diamond card. No spending limit. Access to anything money could buy.
Only 12 existed in the world, and Richard owned 2 of them. "I am giving you this card, Maria," Richard said, holding it out to her. "You may buy whatever you want, anything at all. No limits, no questions asked. Consider it a gift for your years of loyal service." Maria stared at the card as if it might burn her. She did not reach for it. Her mind raced, trying to understand the trap, because this was clearly a trap. Rich men did not give away unlimited wealth for no reason. "Sir, I do not understand," she whispered. "It is quite simple," Richard continued, his voice taking on a theatrical quality that told Maria this was as much for the audience as it was for her. "Take the card, go shopping, buy whatever your heart desires. The only rule is that you must use it tonight, right now. My driver will take you anywhere you wish to go, and when you return, you will show us all what you have purchased." The crowd leaned in, fascinated. This was entertainment for them, the billionaire and his social experiment. Maria finally raised her eyes to meet Richard's gaze. In that moment, he saw something he had not expected. Not greed or excitement, but deep sadness. "This is a test," she said quietly. It was not a question. Richard felt a flicker of surprise. She was more perceptive than he had given her credit for. "Does it matter?" he replied. Maria looked around the room at all the wealthy faces, watching her like she was an animal in a zoo. She saw the judgment in their eyes, the anticipation. They wanted to see her fail. They wanted to see her prove that she was just like them underneath her humble exterior. Or perhaps they wanted to see her resist, so they could feel superior in their restraint, even though none of them had ever faced real poverty, real desperation. Then she looked back at Richard and slowly extended her hand. She took the card. Her fingers trembled as they closed around it. It felt impossibly heavy, like it carried the weight of all her choices. "I will go now," she said. "Excellent," Richard replied. "Thomas will drive you. Take your time. We will all be waiting here to see what you choose." Maria nodded and turned away. The crowd parted for her like a sea. As she walked toward the door, the whispers began immediately. Richard heard fragments of conversations around him. "She will buy jewelry, obviously. Women always want diamonds." "No, a car. That is what I would do. A Mercedes or perhaps a Porsche?" "Perhaps designer clothes. She has probably dreamed about them for years, looking at magazines, imagining. I bet she goes for a handbag, one of those Hermes ones that cost more than a car." "This is cruel, Richard," said a voice beside him. He turned to see Catherine Monroe, a board member and one of the few people who occasionally challenged him.
She was in his 50s, elegant and sharp as a knife. "You are humiliating that poor woman." "I am giving her opportunity," Richard corrected. "How is that humiliation?" "Because you have made her a spectacle," Catherine replied. "You have turned her life into your entertainment. Look at these people. They are salivating at the chance to judge her choices. Whatever she buys, it will be wrong in their eyes. Too expensive, and she is greedy. Too cheap, and she is foolish for wasting the opportunity." Richard sipped his champagne. "We shall see what she does with the opportunity. That is the interesting part. People reveal their true nature when given power. Or when they are put under pressure," Catherine countered. "You have no idea what is happening in that woman's life. What if she has debts? What if she has family she supports? You have just put her in an impossible position." "Then she will make a choice," Richard said, "and we will learn who she really is." Catherine shook her head. "I think you will learn more about yourself than about her." Outside, Maria climbed into the back of the limousine. The leather seats were soft, the interior smelled of expensive cologne and new car. Thomas, the driver, turned to look at her through the rearview mirror. He was in his 70s, with kind eyes and silver hair. He had driven for Richard for 20 years and had seen many strange things, but this was unusual even by his employer's standards. "Where to, Miss Santos?" he asked gently. Maria stared at the black card in her hands. It felt heavy, like it carried the weight of judgment. She knew what they expected. She knew this was a game to them. The rich man and his rich friends wanted to see what the poor maid would do when given the keys to the kingdom. They wanted her to prove that she was just like them underneath, that everyone was greedy when given the chance. Tears began sliding down her cheeks. Thomas saw them and felt his heart break a little. He had always liked Maria. She was one of the few people at the mansion who treated him like a human being rather than a servant. "Miss Santos?" he asked with concern. "Are you all right?" Maria wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "Please take me to the hospital," she said quietly. "St. Mary's Medical Center, the emergency ward." Thomas looked confused but nodded. "Right away." He paused, then added softly, "Whatever you are dealing with, I hope this helps." "Thank you, Thomas," Maria whispered. The limousine pulled away from the mansion and into the night. Maria watched the city lights blur past the window. She had not told anyone about her son. She never spoke about her personal life at work. It was easier that way, safer. Rich people did not want to hear about the struggles of their employees. They wanted the house cleaned, the meals prepared, the invisible machinery of comfort to function without complaint. But Diego was all she had in the world. He was 12 years old and dying. The words still felt impossible even after 6 months of doctors and tests and treatments that did nothing. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She had researched it obsessively, staying up late on the library computer, reading medical journals she barely understood. The survival rate was good if caught early and treated aggressively, but the treatment was expensive, very expensive. Maria made $14 an hour cleaning Richard Pemberton's mansion. She worked 50 hours a week, sometimes more when there were parties or events. That came to about $36,000 a year before taxes. After taxes, rent, food, and transportation, she was left with almost nothing. She sent most of what remained back to Brazil to support her mother and younger sister. What little she kept went toward Diego's basic care. But the experimental treatment his doctors recommended, the one that might actually save his life, cost $300,000. The hospital had applied for grants and assistance programs, but Diego did not qualify. He was not poor enough because Maria worked, but he was not rich enough because Maria was not rich.
They existed in the terrible middle ground where people fell through the cracks of a system designed to help only the very poorest or serve only the very richest. She had been praying for a miracle. Perhaps this was it. Or perhaps it was a trap, a test to see if she would steal from her employer when given the chance. Maybe the card had limits after all, and Richard wanted to see if she would try to exceed them. Maybe he would have her arrested.
Maybe this was all an elaborate game whose rules she did not understand. Either way, she had no choice. Diego was dying. The doctor said he had perhaps 6 months without the treatment. She could not let him die. She would not. If that meant losing her job, losing her reputation, even going to jail, so be it. Her son's life was worth more than anything else in the world. The hospital was quiet at this hour. Maria walked through the automatic doors, still wearing her uniform. The security guard, a large man named Marcus, recognized her and nodded. She came here every night after work, spending an hour or two sitting beside Diego's bed before taking 2 buses home to her small apartment. "Evening, Miss Santos," Marcus said. "Diego had a better day today. I heard him laughing with the nurses earlier." Maria smiled through her tears. "Thank you for telling me." She walked through the familiar halls, past the gift shop that closed at 9, past the chapel where she sometimes sat and prayed, past the cafeteria with its smell of industrial coffee and overcooked vegetables. She knew every inch of this hospital. It had become her second home. Maria approached the reception desk in the oncology ward. The nurse on duty, Jennifer, looked up and smiled sadly when she saw her. Jennifer was young, maybe 25, with bright red hair and a kind face. She always took extra time with Diego, talking to him about video games and movies, treating him like a person instead of a patient. "He is sleeping," Jennifer said. "It was a rough day. The nausea was bad, but he kept down dinner, which is good." "I need to speak with Dr. Carlson," Maria said. Her voice was steady now. She had made her decision. "Is he still here?" "I think he is in his office. He usually stays late on Tuesdays. I can page him." "Please, tell him it is urgent." Jennifer picked up the phone and made the call. 5 minutes later, Dr. Carlson appeared. He was young for a cancer specialist, probably in his late 30s, with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His white coat had a coffee stain on the pocket. He had always been kind to Maria, never condescending, always explaining things clearly, even when she asked the same questions multiple times. "Mrs. Santos," he said, using the title out of politeness, even though Maria had never been married. Diego's father had left before he was born, disappearing back to Brazil and never responding to her messages. "What can I do for you? Is everything all right with Diego?" "I need to speak with you privately," Maria said. They walked to his office, a cramped space filled with medical journals and patient files. A framed photo on his desk showed a woman and 2 small children. He had a family. Maria wondered if that made her son's case harder for him, seeing his own children in every sick child he treated. Dr. Carlson sat behind his desk and gestured for Maria to take the chair across from him. She sat down and carefully placed the diamond card on the desk between them. He stared at it. Then he looked at Maria with confusion and something that might have been alarm. "Mrs. Santos, where did you get this?" "My employer gave it to me tonight," Maria said. "He told me I could buy whatever I wanted with no limits. So I want to buy Diego's treatment, the experimental protocol, the one you told me about last month." Dr. Carlson leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing what this meant. He picked up the card and examined it, turning it over in his hands. "This is real," he said softly. "Yes. Mrs. Santos, do you understand what you are asking? This treatment is extremely expensive. The full protocol, including the immunotherapy, the targeted drug cocktail, the monitoring, the hospital stays, everything, comes to approximately $300,000. That is more money than most people will earn in their entire lives. I understand, Maria said. Her voice did not waver. How much time does Diego have without it? Dr. Carlson's expression softened with sorrow. Honestly, perhaps 4 to 6 months. The cancer is aggressive. We are doing what we can with standard chemotherapy, but it is not enough. The tumor is not shrinking fast enough. We need something stronger. And with the treatment, what are his chances? If we start immediately, his chances of complete remission are approximately 70%. The drugs are new, but they have shown remarkable results in pediatric leukemia cases. Diego's age and overall health before the cancer give him an advantage. But every day we wait, those odds decrease. Maria felt her hands shake. 70%. Not a guarantee, but a chance. A real chance. Then please, she said, use the card. Start the treatment. Save my son. Dr. Carlson studied her face. Mrs. Santos, I must ask. Does your employer understand what you intend to do with this card? He told me to buy what my heart desires, Maria said simply. My heart desires my son alive. Something shifted in Dr. Carlson's expression. Respect, perhaps, or admiration, or maybe just recognition of a mother's love, which transcended logic and self-preservation and everything else. Then let us make it happen, he said. He pulled out his phone and began making calls. I will contact the treatment center and the pharmaceutical company. We need to verify the card can cover these charges, set up the payment plan, and schedule Diego's first infusion. If everything goes smoothly, we can start the first round of treatment as early as tomorrow morning. Maria felt her knees go weak with relief. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. You are a remarkable mother, Dr. Carlson said gently. Diego is very lucky to have you. The next 2 hours were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. The card had to be verified with the bank, which required several security checks given the enormous sum involved. The treatment center needed to confirm they had the drugs in stock. The hospital's billing department had to be contacted, even at this late hour, to set up the account. Through it all, Maria sat in Dr. Carlson's office, praying that the card was real, that Richard had not been lying, that this miracle would not evaporate like morning mist. Finally, Dr. Carlson hung up the phone and smiled. It is done, he said. The payment has been approved. We will begin the first round of immunotherapy tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Diego will need to stay in the hospital for the duration of the treatment, which could be anywhere from 8 to 12 months, depending on how he responds. But, Mrs. Santos, I want to be clear. This gives him a fighting chance. It is not a guarantee. I understand, Maria said. A chance is all I ask for. A chance is everything. After completing all the necessary arrangements, Maria asked to see her son. She walked quietly to his room, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors tracking Diego's vitals. He was asleep, his small body looking even tinier beneath the hospital blankets. His skin had the grayish pallor that came with aggressive chemotherapy. His once thick black hair had fallen out in patches, leaving his scalp mottled and tender. Maria sat in the chair beside his bed, the same chair she had occupied for hundreds of hours over the past 6 months. She took his hand carefully, mindful of the IV port taped to his wrist. His hand felt so fragile, like bird bones wrapped in paper. I did something tonight, mijo, she whispered in Portuguese, the language of her childhood, the language of her heart. Something that might save you. Your doctor says we can start the new treatment tomorrow. The good one. The one that will make you strong again." Diego did not wake, but his fingers tightened slightly around hers. Maria allowed herself to cry then, quietly, letting the fear and hope and exhaustion pour out of her. She had been so strong for so long. Every day she woke up and put on her uniform and went to work and smiled and said yes sir and no sir and pretended her world was not ending. But here, in this room, she could finally break. She thought about the party at the mansion. She thought about Richard and his guests watching her, judging her, waiting to see what she would choose. She wondered what they expected. Jewelry, probably, or clothes, or some other frivolous luxury that would confirm their beliefs about people like her. They would be disappointed. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they would understand. Perhaps they would see her choice and recognize the love behind it. Or perhaps they would call her foolish for spending so much money on a 70% chance. Perhaps they would say she should have taken the cash and run, secured her own future instead of gambling on a sick child. Maria did not care. She had made her choice. She would live with the consequences. If Richard fired her, she would find another job. If he took back the money somehow, she would fight him in court. If the treatment failed and Diego died anyway, at least she would know she had done everything possible. She would not have to live with the regret of letting him die when she had been given the power to save him. She stayed with Diego for another hour, holding his hand and whispering prayers. Finally, she kissed his forehead and stood to leave. She had to return to the mansion. She had to face Richard and his guests and show them what she had done. The thought filled her with dread, but there was no avoiding it. Thomas was waiting in the limousine outside. When Maria emerged from the hospital empty-handed, he understood.
He did not ask questions. He simply opened the door for her and drove her back to the mansion in silence. Sometimes, kindness meant knowing when not to speak. Back at the mansion, the party was winding down. It was nearly 3 in the morning. Most of the guests had left, but a dedicated group remained, curious to see the conclusion of Richard's experiment. They sat in the main parlor, drinking coffee and speculating about what the maid would return with. Richard himself was growing impatient. He checked his watch for the 10th time. Where was she? How long did it take to spend money? Catherine Monroe had not left. She sat in a corner, watching Richard with an expression of barely concealed disgust. She had tried to convince the others to leave, to deny Richard his spectacle. But curiosity had won out. People always wanted to see how the story ended. Finally, headlights swept across the front windows. The limousine had returned. The remaining guests perked up with interest. Richard stood and straightened his jacket. The game was about to reveal its conclusion. He felt a strange mixture of anticipation and unease. Part of him wanted Maria to prove him right, to confirm his cynical worldview. But another part, a part he had tried to bury for decades, hoped she would surprise him. The front door opened. Maria entered alone, still wearing her uniform. She was not carrying shopping bags. No jewelry glittered on her fingers. No designer purse hung from her shoulder. No car keys dangled from her hand. She looked exactly as she had when she left, except her eyes were red from crying. The guests murmured in confusion. Richard felt his stomach tighten. Something was wrong. Or perhaps something was very right. Maria walked directly to Richard and held out the diamond card. He took it automatically, frowning. "Well?" he asked. The guests had gathered behind him, craning their necks to see. "What did you buy?" Maria met his gaze steadily. Her voice was clear and strong, without apology or shame. "I bought my son's life, Mr. Pemberton. I paid for the experimental medical treatment that will save him from cancer. The total cost was $297,000. The treatment begins tomorrow morning at 10. If he responds well, he has a 70% chance of complete remission." The room went completely silent. Richard felt the words hit him like a physical blow. He had expected greed. He had expected selfishness.
He had expected her to prove his cynical view of human nature correct. Instead, she had taken his test and turned it into something he never anticipated, an act of pure, desperate love. "You have a son?" he asked. His voice came out strange, almost hoarse. "Yes, sir. Diego. He is 12 years old. He has been sick for 6 months. I did not tell you because it is not your burden to carry. It is mine. But tonight, you gave me the power to save him, so I did. If this was wrong, if I misunderstood your offer, I am sorry. I will work for you for free for as long as you wish. I will pay back every cent, even if it takes the rest of my life." Catherine Monroe stepped forward from the crowd. There were tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, her voice breaking. She pulled Maria into an embrace. Maria stood stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention and the physical contact, but Catherine did not let go. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing at all. Do you hear me? Nothing." Richard looked around at his guests. They were all staring at him now, and for the first time in decades, he felt ashamed. What had he been trying to prove? That everyone could be corrupted? That loyalty and virtue were illusions? Instead, this woman, who he had barely noticed, who he had treated as invisible furniture in his own home, had shown more integrity and courage than anyone in this room. She had been given unlimited wealth for a single night and used it to save her child. The choice was so obvious, so fundamentally human, that Richard felt like a fool for not seeing it coming. But more than that, he felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for a very long time. One of the guests, a banker named Gerald, spoke up. "That is very touching, but surely there were other options. Government programs, charity organizations? Why spend so much money on treatment that only has a 70% success rate?" Maria turned to look at him. "Would you ask that question if it was your child dying?" Gerald fell silent. "No," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength. "You would not. You would spend every penny you had, and more. You would sell everything you owned. You would beg, borrow, and steal. Because when it is your child, percentages do not matter. Hope is all you have. And I was given hope tonight, so I took it." Richard found himself speaking before he could stop the words. "How long has your son been sick?" "6 months, sir." "He was diagnosed in March. At first, the doctors thought it was just the flu, but he kept getting worse. By the time they realized it was leukemia, the cancer had already spread. We have been doing standard chemotherapy, but it is not working fast enough. The doctors say the experimental treatment is his best chance."
"And what happens after the treatment? Will you be able to care for him?"
Maria hesitated. For the first time since returning, her composure wavered.
"I will manage, sir. I always do."
"That is not what I asked." She looked down at her hands.
"The treatment will make him very weak. He will need constant care. Someone to monitor him, help him with basic tasks, take him to appointments. I will have to reduce my hours at work, Perhaps find something closer to the hospital. It will be difficult, but we will survive. We always have.
Richard nodded slowly. His mind was racing, processing everything she had said and everything she had not said. This woman had been working in his house for 7 years. 7 years! And he had never once asked her about her life. Never inquired if she had family, if she was happy, if she needed anything. She had been a ghost in his home, present but unseen. He looked at the diamond card still in his hand, then at Maria's face. She was exhausted. She was terrified. But she was also the bravest person in this room. She had taken his test, his cruel little game, and turned it into salvation for her child. She had not bought jewelry or clothes or cars. She had not secured her own future or paid off debts. She had chosen love over everything else. And in doing so, she had revealed something Richard had spent his entire adult life trying to deny: that people could be good, that selflessness existed, that love was real and powerful and worth more than all the money in the world. "You will not reduce your hours," he said. His voice was firm, decisive. "You will take a leave of absence, paid, for as long as Diego needs you. Full salary, full benefits. And when you return, if you choose to return, you will do so as my personal assistant, not my maid. The position comes with full health insurance for you and your son, a salary of $150,000 per year, and an apartment on the estate property, one of the guest cottages, 2 bedrooms, full kitchen, private garden. Diego can recover there. It will be more comfortable than a hospital, and you will be close to work when you are ready to return." Maria stared at him like he had started speaking another language. "Sir, I cannot accept this." "Yes, you can," Richard said firmly. "Consider it an apology. I tested you tonight because I have spent my life believing the worst about people. You proved me wrong. That is worth more than any amount of money on that card." Tears spilled down Maria's cheeks again. "But why? Why are you being so kind?" "Because you deserve it," Richard said simply. "And because your son deserves a mother who does not have to choose between saving his life and keeping a roof over his head. No one should have to make that choice." The guests began applauding. It started slowly, just Catherine at first, then spread through the room until everyone was clapping. It was genuine applause, heartfelt and moved. Richard felt strange accepting it. He had done nothing admirable. He had simply stopped being cruel. As the last guests departed, offering Maria their congratulations and best wishes for Diego's recovery, the mansion fell quiet. Maria remained in the parlor, looking lost and overwhelmed. Richard poured himself a brandy and sat down across from her. "I need to know something," he said. "Were you afraid? When I gave you the card, were you afraid it was a trap?" Maria nodded. "Yes. I thought perhaps you wanted to see if I would steal from you, or that the card had limits and you would punish me for trying to exceed them. But I did not care. My son was dying. Nothing else mattered. And if I had refused to pay, if I had taken back the money, then I would have fought you," Maria said quietly. "I would have gone to lawyers, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. I would have fought until I had nothing left, because that is what mothers do." Richard felt something twist in his chest. "My mother died when I was young. Cancer, actually. We could not afford the treatment. My father tried everything, but it was not enough. She died in pain at home because we could not even pay for a hospital bed." The guests began applauding. "I am sorry. I swore I would never be that powerless again," Richard continued. "I built my fortune so that I would never have to watch someone I loved die because of money. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I was building it. I forgot that money is supposed to help people, not just accumulate. You reminded me of that tonight." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Richard stood and walked to the kitchen. Maria followed, confused. He began washing the glasses left by the guests, his movements awkward and unpracticed. "What are you doing?" Maria asked. "Learning," Richard said. "You should go home. Or better yet, go back to the hospital. Stay with your son. Tell him the good news." "But the cleaning." "Will be here tomorrow," Richard said firmly. "Your son needs you more than I need clean glasses. Go, Maria. Be with Diego. That is an order from your employer." Maria smiled through her tears. She removed her apron and folded it neatly, placing it on the counter. Then she did something unexpected. She stepped forward and hugged Richard. It was brief, just a moment, but it was real and warm and human. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for giving me the chance to save him." Then she was gone, and Richard was alone in his enormous kitchen, surrounded by dirty glasses and the remnants of a party that seemed meaningless now. He picked up another glass and continued washing. The water was warm. The task was simple. For the first time in years, Richard Pemberton felt at peace. Over the following weeks and months, Richard found himself thinking about Maria and Diego constantly. He received updates from Dr. Carlson, who reported that the treatment was progressing well. Diego was responding positively to the immunotherapy. The cancer was retreating. His blood counts were improving. It was still early, but the signs were incredibly hopeful. Richard visited the hospital one afternoon, bringing books and a gaming system for Diego. He had asked Catherine what 12-year-old boys liked, and she had laughed and told him to just ask Diego himself. But Richard wanted to bring something, some gesture that showed he cared. The boy was awake when Richard arrived, sitting up in bed reading a comic book. He was thin and pale, his head completely bald from the treatment, but his eyes were bright and alert. When he saw Richard enter, those eyes widened with recognition. "You must be Mr. Pemberton," Diego said. His English was excellent, better than his mother's, probably from attending school in America since he was small. "My mom says you are the reason I am getting better." "But the cleaning." "Your mother is the reason," Richard corrected, sitting in the chair beside the bed. He felt awkward and out of place in the sterile hospital room. When was the last time he had visited someone in a hospital? He could not remember. "I simply gave her the means. She made the choice. That takes more courage than I have ever had." "She always makes the right choice," Diego said seriously, "even when it is really, really hard." They talked for over an hour. Diego told him about school, about his friends who visited when they could, about the book he was writing in his head, about a boy who could fly above the city and see everyone's secrets. Richard found himself genuinely interested, asking questions, encouraging the kid's imagination. Diego was smart and funny and incredibly brave for someone facing what he was facing. "Are you scared?" Richard asked at one point. It was probably not an appropriate question, but he wanted to know. Diego considered this carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Late at night, when the nurses check on me and I wake up, I think about dying, about never growing up, never going to high school, never kissing a girl." He blushed at this last part. "But then I think about my mom, and how hard she works, and how much she loves me. And I think I have to get better. I have to, because she gave up everything for me. I cannot let her down." Richard felt his throat tighten. "You could never let her down, Diego. Just by being her son, you have given her purpose and love. That is more than most people get in their entire lives." When Maria came back from the cafeteria, carrying 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee, she stopped in the doorway. Her face showed surprise and worry when she saw Richard sitting with Diego.
"Mr. Pemberton," she said, "I did not know you were coming." "I wanted to meet the young man who helped his mother teach me something important," Richard said, standing. He took one of the coffee cups from her hands. "May I?" They sat together, the three of them, in that small hospital room. Richard told Diego about his business, about traveling the world, about the strange and interesting people he had met. Diego listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed a sharp mind. Maria watched them both, still looking nervous, as if waiting for Richard to reveal that this kindness was temporary, that the other shoe would drop. But it never did. Richard visited twice a week after that, always bringing something: books, puzzles, art supplies, once even a telescope that Diego could use from his hospital window to look at the stars. He never stayed long, maybe an hour each time, but those hours became something Richard looked forward to more than any business meeting or social event. Dr. Carlson pulled Richard aside one evening after a visit. They stood in the hallway, speaking quietly so Diego would not overhear. "I wanted to thank you personally," the doctor said. "What you did for that family, it is extraordinary. Diego's response to the treatment has exceeded all our expectations. The tumors are shrinking rapidly. His white blood cell counts are stabilizing. If this continues, he could be in complete remission within 6 months instead of a year." "That is Maria's doing, not mine," Richard said. "She never gave up on him." "True," Dr. Carlson agreed. "But you gave her the tools to fight. Most of my patients do not have that luxury. I see children die every month because their families cannot afford treatment. It breaks my heart every single time. What you did for Diego, I wish I could do for all of them." An idea began forming in Richard's mind. It was ambitious, perhaps even naive, but the seed had been planted. That night, he could not sleep. He lay in his enormous bed in his enormous house and thought about all the Diegos in the world, all the Marias working themselves to exhaustion, watching their children die because they could not afford to save them. The unfairness of it burned in his chest. The next morning, Richard called his lawyers and accountants. He wanted to establish a foundation, a real one, not the kind wealthy people created for tax benefits and publicity. This would be dedicated entirely to funding experimental cancer treatments for children whose families could not afford them. He would start with an endowment of $50 million from his personal fortune. The foundation would be called the Diego Santos Foundation. When he told Maria about it a week later, she cried so hard she could not speak for several minutes. They were in his study, and Richard had awkwardly handed her tissues until she could compose herself. "You do not have to do this," she finally managed to say. "Diego is getting better. You have already done so much." "I am not doing this for Diego," Richard explained. "I am doing it for all the other children like him, and for all the other mothers like you, who should never have to choose between bankruptcy and watching their child die. If I have this much money, more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, then I should use it for something that matters." "You are a good man," Maria said softly. "You pretend not to be, but you are." "I am learning to be," Richard corrected. "You are teaching me." 3 months after the treatment began, Diego was declared in complete remission. The cancer was gone. He would need regular monitoring for years to ensure it did not return, but Dr. Carlson was optimistic. The boy had beaten the odds. He was going to live. Maria had moved into the cottage on Richard's estate by then. It was a beautiful space, far nicer than anywhere she had ever lived. Diego's room had large windows that overlooked the garden. He spent hours sitting in the window seat, reading or drawing, or just watching the birds. His hair was growing back, soft and dark. His color was returning.
He looked like a normal 12-year-old boy again, not a cancer patient. Richard had kept his promise about the job. Maria now worked as his personal assistant, though her duties were far more personal than professional. She managed his schedule, yes, but she also reminded him to eat lunch when he got absorbed in work. She asked him how he slept. She brought him tea when he worked too late in his study. She told him when he was being unreasonable or unkind. She treated him like a person, not an employer. And slowly, Richard found himself coming back to life. His relationships with his business partners changed too. He was less suspicious, more willing to trust. He started actually listening to people instead of constantly looking for hidden motives. When someone disappointed him, he was hurt but not destroyed. When someone proved trustworthy, he celebrated it. He was learning to be human again, mistake by mistake, connection by connection. The Diego Santos Foundation launched 6 months after that night at the party. The press coverage was enormous. Richard gave interviews, something he normally avoided, because he wanted people to know about the foundation's mission. He wanted other wealthy people to contribute. He wanted insurance companies to see the public pressure and change their policies. He wanted the world to know that children were dying of treatable diseases because of money, and that was unacceptable. Maria stood beside him at the press conference, holding Diego's hand. The boy had insisted on being there, wearing a suit that Catherine had helped Maria pick out. When the reporters asked Diego what he wanted to say, he stepped up to the microphone with the fearlessness of youth. "I was dying," he said simply. "The doctors told my mom I had 6 months to live. But Mr. Pemberton gave my mom a chance to save me, and she took it. Now I am better. But there are lots of other kids like me who are still dying because their families do not have the money. That is not fair. That is not right. So this foundation is going to help them. And if you have money, if you can help, please do, because every kid deserves the chance to grow up." There was not a dry eye in the room. The video of Diego's speech went viral. Within a week, the foundation had received an additional $20 million in donations. Other wealthy individuals pledged support. 3 major corporations committed to annual contributions. The foundation expanded beyond what Richard had initially imagined. But the real change happened in quieter ways. Richard started spending less time at the office and more time at home. He had dinners with Maria and Diego several times a week. They would sit in the cottage's small dining room, eating Maria's cooking, which was far better than anything his chef made, and talking about their days. Diego would tell them about his tutoring sessions because he was still too weak to return to regular school. Maria would share stories about the people she met while running errands for Richard. And Richard would find himself laughing at Diego's jokes, or offering advice on Maria's questions, or simply sitting in comfortable silence as they ate. He met Maria's mother and sister when they visited from Brazil. Her mother, Rosa, was a tiny woman with the same warm eyes as Maria. She hugged Richard like he was family, thanking him in rapid Portuguese that he could not understand but felt in his heart. Maria's sister, Lucia, was younger, maybe 25, and studying to be a teacher. She looked at Richard with the mixture of gratitude and suspicion, as if waiting for him to reveal that he expected something in return for his generosity. "I do not want anything," Richard told her through Maria's translation. "Your sister saved my life as much as I saved Diego's. She reminded me what it means to be human. That is worth more than money." Lucia's expression softened. She always sees the good in people, even when there is not much good to see. "Then I am fortunate she saw some in me," Richard replied. One evening, nearly a year after the party,
Richard sat in the garden watching Diego play with the dog Richard had bought him. It was a golden retriever puppy named Sunny because Diego said he was bright like sunshine. The dog bounded across the grass, and Diego chased after him, laughing. The sound of that laughter was the most beautiful thing Richard had ever heard. Maria sat in the chair beside him, enjoying the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of evening that made you believe in beauty, in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. "I never thanked you properly," Richard said. "For what?" Maria asked, genuinely confused. "You gave me everything." "You gave me more," Richard replied. He turned to look at her. "That night, when I handed you that card, I was playing a game, a cruel game. I was trying to prove that everyone has a price, that loyalty and love and virtue are just masks people wear to hide their selfishness. I wanted to expose you, to prove that you were no different from anyone else." "I know," Maria said gently. "But you showed me I was wrong," Richard continued. "You took my test and turned it into something beautiful. You chose love over everything else. You chose your son over wealth, over security, over your own future. That kind of love, that kind of sacrifice, I had forgotten it existed. I had convinced myself it was a fairy tale. But you proved it was real." "Any mother would have done the same," Richard agreed. "But you were the one who had the courage to do it in front of all those people. You were the one who risked everything on a 70% chance. You trusted in hope when you had every reason to give up. That takes strength I never had." Maria was quiet for a moment, watching Diego play. "You have that strength too, Richard. You proved it every day since that night. You changed. Most people cannot do that. Most people stay who they are forever, no matter what they learn. But you learned, and you became better. You started the foundation. You spend time with Diego. You treat me like a friend instead of a servant. That is the real miracle." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You see me more clearly than I see myself." "That is because I have been watching you for 7 years," Maria said with a small smile. "I know who you pretend to be, and I know who you really are underneath. You are not as cold as you think." "I was cold," Richard said. "I spent decades building walls around myself. After my father died, after I watched his friends abandon him, I swore I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me. I would be powerful, untouchable, alone. And I achieved that. But it was a hollow victory. I had everything and nothing at the same time." "And now?" Maria asked. "Now I have something worth protecting," Richard said. "Not money or power or reputation. I have you and Diego. I have the foundation and the children it helps. I have a reason to wake up in the morning that is not just about making more money. You gave me that." Maria reached over and squeezed his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. It meant she understood. It meant she forgave him for testing her. It meant she saw the man he was trying to become, not the man he had been. Diego called out to them from across the garden. Sunny had stolen his shoe and was running in circles. The boy was laughing so hard he could barely stand. Maria stood up, smiling, and started walking toward her son. Then she paused and looked back at Richard. "Are you coming?" she asked. Richard stood. "Yes," he said, "I am." They walked together across the grass toward the boy and the dog. The evening light made everything glow golden. In that moment, Richard understood something profound. The test had not been about Maria at all. It had been about him. About whether he was capable of seeing love when it was offered. About whether he could recognize true wealth when it stood before him in the form of a humble woman making an impossible choice. The diamond card had bought many things that night. It had bought experimental medicine and hospital stays and doctor's appointments. But more importantly, it had bought Richard Pemberton a second chance at life, a chance to be more than his money, a chance to matter to someone, a chance to love and be loved in return. As they reached Diego, the boy grabbed Richard's hand and Maria's hand, linking the three of them together. "Come on," he said, pulling them toward where Sonny was digging enthusiastically in a flower bed. "We have to stop him before he destroys the whole garden." Richard let himself be pulled along, laughing at the chaos, feeling lighter than he had in decades. This was what mattered. Not board meetings or profit margins or stock prices. This moment of pure, simple joy.
This connection to people who saw him as more than a bank account. This family he had accidentally found in the most unexpected way. The test was over. The lesson had been learned. And for Richard Pemberton, life had finally, truly begun. In the months and years that followed, Diego grew stronger and healthier. He returned to school, made new friends, joined the soccer team. He never forgot how close he had come to dying, but he did not let it define him. Instead, it made him appreciate every moment, every experience, every ordinary day that others took for granted. Maria continued working for Richard, but their relationship had evolved into something neither could quite name. Not employer and employee, not quite friends, though they were that too. Something deeper. Family, perhaps. The family both of them had needed but never expected to find. Richard funded 17 more foundations over the next 5 years. Education for underprivileged children, housing for the homeless, job training for refugees, each one carefully managed, properly funded, designed to create real change instead of just good publicity. He still ran his businesses, still made money, but now it had purpose beyond accumulation. On the 5-year anniversary of that night, Richard threw another party. But this one was different. It was smaller, more intimate. He invited the people who mattered: Maria and Diego, Dr. Carlson and his family, Catherine Monroe, Thomas the driver, the nurses from the hospital who had cared for Diego, the families whose children had been helped by the foundation. As everyone gathered in the garden where Diego had played so many times, Richard stood and raised his glass. The evening light was golden again, just like that first night. 5 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd, I believed I had everything. I had wealth and power and success, but I was empty inside. I had forgotten what it meant to care about something more than myself. Then I met a woman who reminded me that the greatest wealth is not what you have, but what you give. That the truest power is not control, but compassion. That real success is not measured in dollars, but in lives changed. He looked at Maria, who stood beside Diego. Both of them were smiling, though Maria's eyes were wet with tears. Maria, Richard continued, you took my test and taught me a lesson I will never forget. You showed me that love is stronger than greed, that hope is more valuable than certainty, and that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can teach us the most. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for showing me how to live. The crowd applauded, but Richard raised his hand. He was not finished. And Diego, he said, looking at the boy who was now 17, tall and healthy and full of life, thank you for fighting so hard. Thank you for reminding me why any of this matters. You are going to do extraordinary things with your life. I know it. Diego nodded, too emotional to speak. Richard turned back to the crowd. I have learned that the purpose of wealth is not to hoard it,
but to use it as a tool for good. The purpose of power is not to dominate, but to lift others up. And the purpose of success is not to stand alone at the top, but to bring as many people with you as you can. This foundation, these programs, these changed lives, they all started with one woman making one choice, the choice to love more than she feared. That is the lesson I want to leave with all of you tonight. Choose love. Always choose love. As the party continued into the night, Richard found himself back in the garden with Maria. Diego had gone inside with his friends, laughing about something on their phones. Music drifted from the house. The stars were emerging in the darkening sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Richard asked. "That night, using the card the way you did?" Maria looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? How could I regret saving my son's life?" "But you could have had so much more. You could have secured your future, bought a house, retired early. Instead, you gambled everything on a 70% chance." "It was not a gamble," Maria said firmly. "It was the only choice. Money comes and goes. Jobs come and go. But Diego is my son. He is my heart. There was never any other option." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand that now, but it took me a long time to learn it." "You learned," Maria said. "That is what matters. Not how long it took, but that you did." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. After a while, Maria spoke again. "Do you remember what you said that night, when you gave me the card?" "I told you to buy whatever your heart desired." "Yes," Maria said, "and I did. My heart desired my son alive and healthy. But in saving him, I also saved you. We saved each other. That is what love does. It multiplies. It spreads." One act of love creates more love, which creates more, and suddenly the whole world is brighter. Richard felt tears on his face. He did not wipe them away. "You are wise, Maria Santos." "No," she said gently. "I am just a mother who loves her son, and a friend who believes in you." Richard looked at her, this remarkable woman who had changed his life by simply being herself. "I am blessed to know you." "And I am blessed to know you," Maria replied. "See, love multiplies." They walked back toward the house together, toward the light and the music and the people celebrating 5 years of second chances. Richard realized that he had spent his whole life searching for something he could not name. Security, perhaps? Or validation? Or proof that he mattered? But it had been here all along, in the simple act of caring about someone else more than himself, in the joy of watching Diego grow up, in the satisfaction of helping other families avoid the pain Maria had endured, in the quiet companionship of a friend who saw through his defenses to the lonely man beneath. The test had revealed the truth, that the most valuable thing any person can possess is not money or power, but the capacity to love and be loved. Maria had taught him that with a single choice, and Richard had spent 5 years learning to live that truth. As they reached the door, Diego appeared, pulling Richard toward his friends who wanted to hear stories about the foundation. Maria smiled and gave him a gentle push. "Go," she said. "They need to hear from you." Richard let himself be pulled into the crowd, into the noise and the laughter and the life. For so many years, he had stood apart, observing from a distance, protected by his wealth and his walls. But Maria had torn those walls down with her simple, profound act of love. Now, Richard stood in the center of it all, surrounded by people he cared about and who cared about him. He was no longer the lonely millionaire testing the loyalty of his servants. He was simply a man who had been given a second chance and chosen not to waste it. The party continued late into the night, filled with stories and laughter and hope. And when everyone finally left, when the house grew quiet again, Richard did not feel empty. He felt full, full of gratitude, full of purpose, full of love. He stood in his study, looking at the photo on his desk. It was from Diego's high school graduation, just last month.
Maria stood between Richard and Diego, her arms around both of them. They were all smiling, genuinely happy. They looked like family. Richard picked up the photo and studied it. This was his real wealth. Not the money in his accounts or the properties in his name. These people, these connections, this love. He set the photo back down and turned off the light. As he walked through his mansion, he did not feel the emptiness that had haunted him for so long. Instead, he felt peace. Tomorrow, Diego would start his first year of college. He was studying medicine, wanting to become an oncologist like Dr. Carlson. Maria would drive him to campus and help him move into his dorm. Richard would come along, carrying boxes and probably embarrassing Diego with his attempts to be helpful. It was ordinary and perfect, and everything Richard had never known he wanted. The test had been simple. Give someone unlimited wealth and see what they choose. Maria had chosen love, and in doing so, she had taught Richard the most valuable lesson of his life, that money is meaningless unless you use it to create something that matters, that power is worthless unless you use it to help those who have none, that success means nothing if you reach it alone. Richard climbed the stairs to his bedroom, grateful for every step, grateful for Maria's courage, grateful for Diego's recovery, grateful for the chance to become someone better than the man he had been. As he lay down to sleep, Richard smiled. The test had revealed the truth, just not the truth he had expected. It had shown him that the invisible people in his life were not invisible at all. They were the most important people of all, and if he was very lucky, they would let him be part of their lives for many years to come. The millionaire had tested his maid with a diamond card, but in the end, it was the maid who had tested the millionaire, and thankfully, wonderfully, miraculously, he had passed.